The Skeletal Ghost. A nightmare made almost flesh. Not actually a ghost, but rather a creature that possesses and animates bones. When deprived of victims, it resembles an amorphous, jellyfish-like humanoid. Without any bones, it tends to just squirm and slide across floors and walls. What makes the Skeletal Ghost dangerous to others is not just its ability to steal bones from a living creature without leaving a wound. It also possesses human-like intelligence. A malicious intelligence that doesn't care that it's feeding off living people, often crippling them in the process. It's fortunate for the victims that it tends to only take one bone per person for each time it catches them. It always approaches when its intended victim is asleep, and then it'll extend its gooey, translucent skin around the limb in question. From there, the bone will vanish from the person, as if it had never been there in the first place. What is left behind is a fleshy limb without any support. Ultimately, this will require amputation or replacement of the missing bone with an artificial support. In cases where the ghost took a more vital bone like the skull, pelvis, or spine, the result is usually fatal. For that reason, it's recommended that only the exterior bones be damaged and removed when attempting capture. The creature, being composed of slime and aging bones, is susceptible to blunt force trauma. So capturing and eliminating the creature isn't terribly complicated. However, agents must be aware that all slime that composes the creature's body must be treated or destroyed. If the remaining slime isn't treated with a solution of salt and a strong base, then the Skeletal Ghost will reform over time. It does so by slowly absorbing dust particles from the air to rebuild itself. This process is sped up considerably when exposed to a strong source of calcium, its primary base material. It is the need for calcium that causes the creature to seek bones as a food source. Testing of captive specimens has shown that the creature is not restricted to human beings or even living sources of calcium. The Skeletal Ghost can easily live off mineral calcium or the bones of a deceased creature. Hunting down living humans is a matter of choice rather than necessity. This is especially galling as eventually all the bones it captures to form a body will dissolve and require replacement. It's the equivalent of carrying around a lunchbox in case you need a snack. The horrific cycle of hunting, crippling, and hibernation for the purposes of digestion is simply the Skeletal Ghost's preference. It was discovered in a small Arizona town a few weeks after a meteor shower. This does not necessarily suggest that the Skeletal Ghost originated from a non-terrestrial source. It's far more likely that the impact in the desert unsealed or awoke the creature after a long hibernation cycle. From confiscated records, it was revealed that the Skeletal Ghost made its way to the nearby town and started small. People were reporting to the hospital for frequent cases of anemia and dizziness. It is assumed that it was taking enough marrow to impact blood production and cause exhaustion in its victims. It must have been learning about modern people and the best ways to sneak into houses. As an amoeba-like creature, it could slip in through the piping or the air conditioning units when more obvious means of access were unavailable. Then it would feed and leave, leaving a drained victim with no idea what had happened to them. With time, it became bolder or gained enough strength that subtlety was no longer necessary. As weeks later, a disturbing report reached our office. One young man woke up and found that his hand had collapsed on itself. It left a loose pile of flesh and tendons where the hand used to be. The hospital completed a battery of tests, and the X-ray revealed that the bones of his hand were simply missing. They retook the examination several times, thinking the machine was faulty, and then using an MRI to confirm the results. Somehow, over the course of a single night, the bones in the man's hand had vanished. It was such an oddity that they sent it up the chain to a bigger hospital for investigation. That was when the agency interrupted and took over the medical investigation. We sent several field agents and researchers just in the nick of time, as the following days saw more and more people presenting with similar symptoms. Due to the nature of the injuries, the usual practice was to implant artificial support where possible or amputate where necessary. The entire town was placed under quarantine, and a house-to-house search was conducted to find the source. The Skeletal Ghost was discovered in the home of one of its victims, where it had set up residence and taken its time with him. It started with his spine, leaving him alive but crippled and unable to defend himself, as it took one bone after another over the course of a week, saving the skull for last. What remained was a mass of flesh and organs with no means of support. It was not a gentle death. Our agents shot the creature on sight, first with standard issue tranquilizers, and when they proved ineffective, with conventional bullets. These fared somewhat better, but only as far as shattering some of the dissolving bones that made up the creature's body. At that point, the creature attacked the agents, and it was discovered that without muscles, tendons, or flesh, the creature was almost pathetically slow and weak. The agents quickly outmaneuvered it and were able to disable it with collapsible batons. After a sweep for further victims, the quarantine was lifted and a cover story was put in place. The victims were told that they had been infected with a rare bacteria that had dissolved bone tissue in the affected area, and that they were lucky to have caught it early. The creature itself was quickly sealed away into a container and brought back to one of the research stations for examination. This was the source of all current information regarding the creature, including the fact that it could communicate with humans. During observation, it was noted that the skeletal ghost reacted to words said in its presence, and even though it lacked eyes, it could read nearby text. It was decided that attempts to communicate would take place. Trying to get it to speak had failed. In hindsight, this is unsurprising given its lack of vocal cords. Sign language and Morse code also proved ineffective. In fact, it remained unresponsive to all attempts. Test after test was run on the creature, to no avail. It was only when most of its bones had dissolved and its shape was becoming unstable that the creature chose to communicate with researchers. The skeletal ghost used excess slime to write on the transparent wall of its cell. The impact-resistant glass was acid-proof, so escape was impossible. The words formed were, "Give me food." It then collapsed into a puddle and remained inert. All further attempts to provoke a reaction from the puddle have failed.